My name is Brooke, and I'm 25 years old. It was my birthday. The kind of evening that looks perfect from the outside, and rotten once you step inside it. A small family gathering in my parents' dining room with warm lights, polished glasses, and smiles that never quite reached anyone's eyes. And I remember thinking, as I adjusted my dress and accepted the first hug, that I should have trusted the tight feeling in my chest that warned me this night wasn't about celebrating me at all. My sister arrived late, like she always did, confident and loud, carrying herself as if the room already belonged to her. And when she hugged me, it was brief, almost formal, her perfume sharp and familiar, her smile thin. Dinner started politely, plates clinking, forced laughter bouncing off the walls, and I tried to stay grateful, tried to tell myself that this was still family, that birthdays were complicated, that I was being too sensitive. I poured myself a glass of wine and listened as my parents talked about work, about neighbors, about anything except me. And when my sister finally cleared her throat, the table went quiet in that heavy way that means something sharp is about to be thrown. She looked straight at me, not with anger, but with something colder, something rehearsed. And on my birthday, my sister said, "We're ashamed that you use our last name." The words landed like a slap, sudden and public, and for a second I thought I had misheard her, that my brain was protecting me by twisting the sound. But then I saw my mother nod slowly, lips pressed together, as if this was a reasonable thing to say, as if shame was a family value we were all meant to share. My dad didn't speak, but he looked at my sister with pride, the same proud look he used to give her when she won awards or spoke up in meetings. And that hurt more than anything she could have said, because it told me this wasn't a mistake. It was a verdict they had already agreed on. I just sat quietly, holding my wine, feeling the stem slick between my fingers, my heart beating so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. And I stared at the tablecloth because if I looked up, I might cry, and I refused to give them that. I thought about all the years I had carried that last name, all the times I had defended it, worked for it, tried to make it mean something good. And suddenly it felt like a costume they were ripping off me in front of everyone. My sister went on, explaining in that calm, superior tone how my choices reflected badly on the family, how people talked, how appearances mattered, and each word felt like another small cut, precise and intentional. I wanted to argue, to ask since when love came with conditions, since when a name was something you earned by obedience. But my throat closed up, and all that came out was silence. Around us, the room felt smaller, the walls listening, the candles flickering as if they were nervous too, and I became acutely aware of how alone I was at my own birthday table. Then I noticed my grandmother, sitting at the far end, quiet until now, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on my sister in a way that made me pause, because there was something there I hadn't seen before, a stillness that wasn't weakness, a patience that felt earned. She pushed her chair back slowly, the legs scraping softly against the floor, and the sound cut through the tension like a blade. No one told her to sit down. No one dared interrupt, and as she stood, the room seemed to hold its breath. I could feel my sister stiffen, could see my mother glance nervously between them, and my father's proud expression waver just a little. Grandma straightened, steady despite her age, and I realized that whatever she was about to say mattered, that it carried weight the rest of us couldn't fake. She looked at me first, really looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't felt all evening: recognition. Then she turned back to my sister, her voice calm but unmistakably firm, and though she said only 2 words, the effect was immediate, like a switch flipping in the room, and my sister's face went pale. I didn't yet understand what those words would mean for me, for us, or for the family story we had been telling ourselves for years. But in that moment, as my wine glass trembled slightly in my hand and my birthday candles burned low, I knew this night wasn't over, and that the shame they tried to place on me was about to be exposed for what it really was. Grandma's 2 words were, "Sit down." And they weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Because authority doesn't shout when it knows it will be obeyed, and my sister froze like she'd been caught doing something she thought no one would challenge, her confident posture collapsing as she slowly lowered herself back into her chair, her face drained of color exactly like the moment promised on that thumbnail. My sister's face went pale, and the silence afterward was so thick it felt like it pressed against my ears. Grandma didn't sit back down herself, though. She stayed standing, hands resting on the table, eyes sharp and clear, and then she spoke again, this time more than 2 words, and every sentence landed exactly where it needed to. She said she had watched this family for decades, watched pride turn into cruelty and standards turn into weapons. and she said she was tired of seeing love handed out like a reward instead of given freely. She looked at my parents and asked them when they had decided that image mattered more than their own child. And my mom opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Her nod from earlier now looking small and ashamed instead of righteous. My dad tried to defend himself, saying he only wanted what was best for the family name. And that was when Grandma smiled sadly and said the family name meant nothing if it was used to crush the people who carried it. I felt something shift inside me, like a knot loosening, because for the first time that night, someone was saying out loud what I had felt for years but never dared to voice. Grandma turned to me again and told everyone how I had helped her after my grandfather died, how I had shown up when no one else had time, how I had carried groceries, listened to stories, fixed small things without ever asking for praise. And each example made my sister sink lower in her chair, because it painted a picture that didn't match the story she had just tried to sell. My parents looked stunned, like they were seeing me for the first time. And I wondered how invisible I must have been for so long if it took this moment to notice. Grandma finished by saying that if anyone at this table should be ashamed, it wasn't the daughter who lived honestly, but the people who tried to rewrite her worth to protect their own egos. And with that, she finally sat down, the room exhaling all at once like it had been holding its breath the entire night. No one spoke for a few seconds, and then my sister laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as an overreaction. But the laugh died quickly because no one joined her, not even my parents. I took a sip of my wine, my hands steadier now, and realized I wasn't shaking anymore, because something important had happened. The power had shifted. My mom finally apologized, quietly, without excuses, and my dad stared at his plate, his pride wounded in a way that couldn't be easily patched over. And for the first time, I didn't rush to make them feel better. I let the discomfort sit, because it wasn't mine to fix. The rest of the evening unfolded awkwardly. Conversations forced, cake eaten without enthusiasm. And when it was time to leave, my sister avoided my eyes entirely, her earlier confidence nowhere to be found. Grandma hugged me last, longer than anyone else, and whispered that a name doesn't make a person, but a person can redefine a name, and I carried those words with me as I stepped out into the cool night air, feeling lighter than I had in years. That birthday didn't magically fix my family, and it didn't turn my sister into someone else overnight, but it did something more important. It reminded me that I didn't need their permission to belong to myself, or to my own story. I went home knowing that whatever shame they tried to hand me was never really mine to carry, and that sometimes the quiet ones at the table are the strongest, waiting for the right moment to stand. My name is Caitlyn, and I'm 28 years old. At the family reunion, my dad introduced his stepdaughter as my real daughter, and told 40 relatives I was the mistake from his first marriage, and everyone laughed. That sentence still echoes in my head because it didn't come out during a fight or a private argument. It came out with a smile, with clinking glasses, with fairy lights hanging over the backyard, like it was a celebration instead of an execution. The moment started innocently enough, the way most disasters do. I arrived alone, wearing a simple blue dress, telling myself I was only there to be polite, that blood still mattered even when it hurt. My dad barely hugged me, just a quick tap on the shoulder like I was a coworker he didn't like. His new wife was already holding court, laughing too loud, touching his arm every few seconds like she needed to remind everyone she owned him now. The reunion was crowded, at least 40 relatives, cousins I hadn't seen in years, aunts who still remembered me as a quiet kid, uncles who only showed up for free food. When my dad clinked his glass and said he wanted to say a few words, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that had been there since childhood whenever he decided to perform. He pulled his stepdaughter closer, wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and proudly said, "I just want everyone to meet my real daughter." A few people nodded, some smiled politely, and I stood there frozen, telling myself maybe I misheard. Then he laughed and added, "Caitlyn? She's just the mistake from my first marriage." There was a beat of silence. Then laughter, actual laughter. The kind that rolls and spreads when people don't know what else to do. My face burned, but I didn't cry. I sipped my water, smiled, and said nothing. Because years of practice had taught me that reacting only made him crueler. Inside, though, something snapped. All the memories rushed in at once. Him skipping my graduation, but posting photos from his stepdaughter's dance recital. Him forgetting my birthday but throwing her a surprise party. Him telling me to be understanding when he paid for her college and told me to take out loans. Standing there while 40 relatives laughed, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a declaration. I was the joke, the cautionary tale, the proof that his life before his new wife didn't count. His stepdaughter looked uncomfortable. I'll give her that. But she didn't say anything. His wife smiled thinly, eyes sharp, watching me like she was daring me to make a scene. I didn't. I finished my water, set the glass down carefully, and felt an odd calm settle over me. That calm didn't come from forgiveness or acceptance, it came from certainty. Because while he thought he was humiliating me, he had no idea what I was holding in my pocket. I had spent months biting my tongue, ignoring late-night texts that buzzed with insults disguised as concern, messages from his wife that told me I was ungrateful, that I should stop clinging to my dad, that I should be grateful she even tolerated my existence. I had saved them all, not out of revenge at first, but because something in me knew I might need proof one day, proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the way they erased me. As the laughter faded and conversations resumed, my dad looked satisfied, like he'd just landed a punch and walked away. Relatives avoided my eyes. A few gave me pity smiles. No one defended me. I stood there listening to the hum of voices, the clatter of plates, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears, and thought, if this is who you want me to be, fine. I would be calm. I would be polite. I would be unforgettable. I replayed his words again. You're my mistake. He had said it like it was a joke, like it was harmless, like it didn't rewrite my entire childhood in one cruel sentence. I thought about my mom, how she used to tell me I was wanted, how she tried to shield me from his disappointment until she couldn't anymore. I thought about every time I'd defended him to friends, every excuse I'd made. And then I looked at his wife, laughing with an aunt, her phone sitting casually on the table beside her. That's when I decided this reunion wasn't going to end the way he thought it would. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I stayed, smiled, and waited. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't immediate. Sometimes it's precise. I stayed quiet for a few minutes after my dad's words landed, letting the moment breathe, letting everyone assume the show was over. Conversation slowly restarted. Laughter returned in awkward bursts, and my dad looked proud, like he'd finally put me in my place. That's when I took another sip of water, set the glass down, smiled, and said clearly, since we're introducing ourselves. The words cut through the noise sharper than shouting ever could. Heads turned. Forks paused midair. My dad frowned, already annoyed that I'd interrupted his victory lap. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, my hand steady in a way that surprised even me. I think it's only fair everyone knows who I'm talking to. I continued, my voice calm, almost pleasant. His wife's smile faltered for just a second, and that second told me everything. I tapped my screen and began reading. Not rushing, not dramatizing, just letting her own words do the work. Text after text filled the air. Messages where she called me a burden, where she told my dad I was embarrassing him by existing, where she said I should be grateful he didn't cut me off completely. I read the one where she told me, in exact words, that I was a mistake he wishes he could erase. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. My dad's face drained of color as he realized what was happening. His wife stepped forward, hissing my name, telling me to stop. But I didn't. I scrolled and kept reading. Messages sent late at night. Messages sent while pretending to be kind in public. Messages that made it painfully clear this wasn't a joke. This was a campaign. The same relatives who laughed minutes earlier now stared at her like they were seeing her for the first time. That's when I looked up and said the words from the reunion again, slow and deliberate so no one could miss them. At the family reunion, my dad introduced his stepdaughter as my real daughter and told 40 relatives I was the mistake from his first marriage. Everyone laughed. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I turned to my dad then, really looked at him and asked, was that funny too? He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried to blame me, said I was twisting things, said I was being dramatic, but the texts were still glowing on my screen, undeniable. His wife's face went completely pale, the way it does when someone realizes their mask is gone, and there's no backup plan. A few aunts started whispering. One uncle shook his head. Someone muttered, that's messed up. For the first time in my life, the narrative wasn't his. It wasn't hers. It was mine. I didn't scream. I didn't insult them. I simply finished by saying, I didn't come here to fight. I came because I thought family meant something. Now I see exactly where I stand. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, picked up my bag, and walked out while 40 people watched. Not laughing this time, not smiling. Outside, the night air hit my face, cool and grounding, and I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from release. I sat in my car for a moment, breathing, replaying everything, and for the first time, the memory didn't hurt the way it used to. Days later, the messages started coming in. Relatives apologizing, cousins saying they had no idea. My dad tried calling, left voicemails full of excuses and anger. But none of them included the words, "I'm sorry." His wife blocked me everywhere, which felt like confirmation more than punishment. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because showing the truth once was enough. I wasn't the mistake. I was the mirror they didn't want to look into. If you've ever been labeled, dismissed, or humiliated by the people who were supposed to protect you, remember this: silence isn't strength when it's forced on you. But choosing when and how to speak can change everything. And if this story hit close to home, if you want more real, raw stories where the truth finally comes out, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because you're not alone, and some stories deserve to be heard, all the way to the end. My name is Natalie, and I am 26 years old. I grew up in a house where affection was conditional and approval had a price tag attached to it. From childhood, I understood one thing very clearly. Love in my family depended on how useful or impressive you were. If you were winning, you were celebrated. If you were struggling, you were ignored. I learned early to stay quiet, to handle things alone, and most importantly, to never ask my parents for money. Not because I didn't need it, but because I knew the cost would be humiliation. Every conversation with them felt like a test I was already failing. They had a fixed idea of what success looked like, and I didn't fit into it. When I chose my own path, the disappointment in their eyes was louder than any argument. Eventually, that disappointment turned into distance, and distance turned into rejection. The day I was kicked out wasn't dramatic. There were no screams, no tears. Just a simple sentence. You need to learn how the real world works. I packed my bag, walked out, and didn't look back because I was afraid if I did, I would break. That night, sleeping on a borrowed couch, I made myself a promise that became my survival rule. I will never need them again. The years that followed tested that promise every single day. I worked long hours at jobs that barely paid the bills, came home exhausted, and still stayed up late teaching myself new skills. I failed more times than I succeeded, but each failure hardened me instead of stopping me. I didn't tell my parents when things went wrong, and I didn't tell them when things went right either. Silence became my power. While they told relatives I was still trying to find myself, I was quietly building something of my own. I lived small, spent carefully, and avoided attention. Even when opportunities started coming, I didn't celebrate loudly. I had learned that peace was found in privacy. Slowly, almost unrealistically, my work began to pay off. One client led to another. One idea turned into a business. And numbers started changing in ways I never imagined. Still, my lifestyle didn't change much. I didn't buy flashy things or post online about success. A part of me still lived like the girl who had been shown the door with nothing but a suitcase. My parents and I barely spoke during those years. When we did, the conversations were shallow and tense. They never asked how I was doing, only what I was planning to do, as if my life was still a project they were waiting to approve. Then one ordinary situation forced an extraordinary moment. A family-related legal form required financial disclosure, something I never thought would matter emotionally. I sat across from my parents at the table I once ate dinner at, feeling strangely calm. When they saw the documents, everything changed. At first, there was confusion, then disbelief, then silence. My father stared at the numbers, reading them again and again. My mother's face stiffened, her eyes sharp. Calculating, and then she said it. Not with pride, not with relief, but with anger. "How dare you hide this?" That sentence told me everything. They weren't shocked that I had succeeded. They were offended that they hadn't known, offended they hadn't been part of it. The page in front of them showed what I had never said out loud: my 14.6 million, built quietly, earned without help, achieved without asking them for anything. My mother started crying, loudly, emotionally, as if this revelation had somehow hurt her. My father immediately shifted into questions, talking about investments, family plans, and future expectations. Not once did either of them ask how I did it or what it cost me. I watched them carefully, noticing how quickly judgment had turned into entitlement. That's when I finally spoke. My voice didn't shake. "I never asked my parents for money," I said calmly. "Not when I left, not when I struggled, not ever." The room went quiet again. My father tried to soften his tone, said something about family being family. My mother reached out like the past could be erased with a touch. I gently pulled away. I looked at them, really looked at them, and asked the question that had waited years to be spoken. Remember when you kicked me out? Neither of them answered. I didn't wait for one. I simply smiled, slow, controlled, unbreakable. With a smile, that smile changed everything. It wasn't cruel, and it wasn't loud, but it carried years of silence inside it. My parents didn't know how to respond because for the first time, I wasn't asking, explaining, or defending myself. I was standing there as proof. The room felt smaller, like the walls were listening. My mother wiped her tears and suddenly shifted her tone. Softer now, almost sweet, the way she used to sound when she wanted something. She said we should talk properly, that families shouldn't have secrets, that I should have trusted them. I listened without interrupting, because I had already learned that some people only hear themselves. My father leaned back and started talking about how proud he was, how he always knew I'd do something big, rewriting history with every sentence. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. The truth was already on the table. They asked where the money was invested, how stable it was, whether I had planned for the future. Not once did they ask how it felt to be alone at 20, scared and broke. Not once did they apologize. That's when I understood something clearly. Success doesn't heal old wounds unless accountability comes with it. I stood up, gathered my papers, and told them calmly that I hadn't hidden anything out of spite. I hid my life because it was mine, because every time I had needed them before, they had closed the door. My mother tried one last time, saying, "We're your parents. We deserve to be part of this." I looked at her and said the truth I had finally accepted. You chose not to be. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable for me anymore. It felt earned. As I walked toward the door, my father asked if I could help them with something they were planning, his voice careful, testing boundaries. I turned back and said without anger, I never asked my parents for money, and I don't owe anyone access to what I built. That was the moment I felt free. Not because of the money, not because of the number attached to my name, but because I no longer needed their validation. Outside, the air felt lighter. I realized I wasn't sad, and I wasn't angry either. I was done. Over the next few weeks, word spread through the family. Calls started coming in from relatives who had never checked on me before. Suddenly proud, suddenly interested. I answered politely, briefly, and kept my distance. I had learned that boundaries are the real luxury. My parents tried a few more times to reconnect, sending messages that danced around the past without touching it. I replied when I felt like it, and when I didn't feel guilty. The girl who once slept on a couch wondering if she would survive had grown into someone who understood her worth. Looking back, I don't regret the pain. It taught me resilience. I don't regret the silence either. It taught me strength. And I don't regret smiling when they finally saw my $14.6 million. Because that smile wasn't revenge, it was closure. If you're listening to my story right now and you feel unseen, underestimated, or pushed aside, remember this. You don't need permission to become something more. You don't need applause to keep going, and you don't need to explain your success to people who weren't there for your struggle. Sometimes the best response is simply to live well and move forward with a smile. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in quiet growth, delayed justice, and self-earned success, make sure you subscribe to the channel. More powerful stories like mine are waiting for you. And the next one might feel like it was written just for you.